when things may be larger than 1 centimeter, but less than 10 centimeters approaches the International Space Station, astronauts are actually directed to suit up and prepare for the worst. It could actually kill our astronauts aboard the International Space Station. Anything larger than 10 centimeters could destroy an entire craft.
I obviously, because I'm sort of, I hate rules, so I never turn my phone off when I get on the plane, and I've always assumed it was one of those rules that was kind of set 30 years ago when people kind of brought on huge old style mobile phones that were the size of suitcases, or anyway 20 years ago, and the sort of analog mobile phones, which were kind of portable radios. And I've always assumed that it was kind of a hangover and that modern technology had changed all this. But I have to say very quickly, because I'm obviously stopping you from giving us the answer, when I talked about this on our breakfast show this morning with the breakfast show presenter Callum MacDonald, he said that when his plane was landing in Edinburgh in thick fog, the captain actually came on the intercom and said everyone had to turn their phones off because they were having to use the automatic landing systems. So clearly, Dr. DeMarchi, something is going on.
That's right. Yeah. So I definitely grew up like you, thinking that this was an antiquated rule that probably didn't apply anymore. Technology is getting smarter and smarter, both on our phones, but also in our planes and on the ground. So I also thought that this was probably something that was, again, just a hangover, until I attended a talk where somebody mentioned it kind of off the cuff, that having your phone not on airplane mode causes roaming for all the phones that are on the ground. So it used to be very much that there was a risk of interfering with the pilot's controls and communications. And so you saw on your flight to Edinburgh that when we did have to revert to that kind of technology, it was much better to be safe than very sorry. And the principle of radio interference that was true then is exactly true today, and that is what causes the roaming. Your phone can act like a military jammer, but instead of jamming flight equipment for the most part, it jams phones that are on the ground.
Oh, I see. So the key point here then is that when you, if like me, you're naughty and you keep your phone on when the flight takes off, you're not actually going to crash the plane. But you might, because your phone is looking for a signal and is sending out very powerful kind of radio waves trying to lock onto a cell phone tower, mobile phone tower, it will interfere with, you're making a phone call on the ground as I take off, it could interfere with your phone call.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Well, I don't think we need to care about that, do we?
Well, it's not just...
I don't care if your phone call's messed up so long as I have access to my phone.
Well, I would say that if everybody did that on every plane, we would notice a huge difference. So I don't know if you're the same age as me, but when there used to be these commercials that were like, can you hear me now? Good. And it used to be very annoying to establish a cell phone connection. Service was not, or reception was not as widespread as it is today. We absolutely take that for granted. So you would single-handedly be sending us back decades if you continued this bad behavior.
Why do you think they have airplane mode? Why do you think they call it airplane mode on your phone?
I would assume that it's a historic sort of artifact. I don't actually know the history of why they call it airplane mode, but you do notice that the one thing that doesn't turn off is Bluetooth, which, if you don't know, Bluetooth itself, the name Bluetooth has a very interesting history. It's actually a Nordic rune, and that is the symbol that is on your phone. But Bluetooth, for example, does not get turned off because it's a very short range signal that really only affects maybe your AirPods, for example.
Go on.
So,
because I thought you could turn your Bluetooth off. In fact, if I go to my settings, it says here I can turn Bluetooth on and off.
Yes, but if you click airplane mode, I believe your Bluetooth stays on.
Oh, is that interesting? That's interesting. So I didn't know. Why did they name it after a Nordic rune?
So there was a warrior called Bluetooth. Right. But I don't know why they chose that name.
And he was into shortwave radio waves.
Presumably, yeah.
What else falls within your purview as a space environmentalist? Are you in charge of clearing up smashed up satellites?
I actually am, yes. So this current year, I'm working on Capitol Hill in a senator's office, and we just passed legislation through the Senate to clean up said space debris. That is a huge, huge issue that we need to address.
So what is the legislation going to achieve?
So doing this would, number one, incentivize people, particularly independent companies, to start developing technology to clean up space debris. You would think you could just go up with a vacuum, but actually you cannot. And some very clever inventions have already been tested and tried. So, for example, a harpoon about the size of a pen has already been in the works, or simply using a laser to guide pieces of space debris down to Earth, or latching onto it and releasing a sail to guide it back down to the Earth's surface. There are many different ideas, and I'm looking forward to the ways that human innovation comes up with even more.
But what is it? Because the interesting thing about space debris, of course, is what you're talking about. Is you're talking about objects that are moving at kind of 17,000 miles an hour, and it could be a small thing, the size of a wheel nut, that if it hits a satellite, could cause very, very severe damage.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's kind of a rule of thumb that's very rough. Anything that's about less than 1 centimeter, you could cause serious damage. So, for example, when things may be larger than 1 centimeter but less than 10 centimeters approaches the International Space Station, astronauts are actually directed to suit up and prepare for the worst. It could actually kill our astronauts aboard the International Space Station. Anything larger than 10 centimeters could destroy an entire craft.
But why hasn't it already happened? I mean, it strikes me there's so much stuff up there. I mean, you see these maps constantly, which make it kind of look almost like the Milky Way. I can't believe there hasn't been an accident like that. It seems astonishing.
There certainly there have been, I should say, larger scale issues of entire bodies of satellites crashing into each other and causing debris to cascade. Part of the issue is that these objects are so small that monitoring them, keeping track of them, and finding them, especially as they're sort of self-proliferating, can be very difficult. So part of the challenge is going to be to monitor and keep tabs on all of these pieces of debris. There's a lot. There's about 11,000 tons.
And then you get this kind of crazy behavior where, for example, the Chinese, I think, destroyed a dead satellite in order to show that they could take out a satellite should there be a conflict, because obviously satellites will be a war zone when World War III breaks out in the next few months. And that would have scattered a huge amount of debris around the solar system.
It absolutely did. Yes, it did. And that is a leading concern because fortunately or unfortunately, there are no laws in outer space. We think about the middle of the ocean as kind of being a free for all, or, it's like the ship's rules are what's the rule of the land. Space has even fewer than the middle of the ocean. So the one law that people like to turn to is the Outer Space Treaty, which was established in the 60s. But not every country signed on to said treaty. The United States did, for example. Which is the only one that I can speak to at this point. And according to that treaty, there were things in there like, please don't be a risk to everybody else in space. But if you sort of target your own satellite and explode it, I mean, that's kind of a gray area. You're not necessarily directly targeting somebody else's satellite.
But it is still wildly irresponsible.
Absolutely.
Which senator are you working for?
I'm working for Senator Hickenlooper of Colorado.
Oh, I've never heard of them.
He's very new.
Is he sane?
Yes, and he has a very funny sense of humor.
Oh, good. Tell us briefly, let's end on airplane Wi-Fi. Apparently, airplane mode switched on enables you to log on to Wi-Fi when you're on an airplane.
Yes.
Why is
so
that?
Sorry, what was the question?
How does Wi-Fi work on an airplane?
Oh, yeah. So the same way that it works in your house, except it, is dialed into, so your phone would access the Wi-Fi on the plane, and the plane presumably would have a powerful enough signal to generate either to connect to another satellite, sometimes it's satellite provided internet, and beam that from the satellite to your phone.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for coming on and answering the question about airplane mode, and then for morphing the whole discussion into how to save space. And thank you for all the important work you're doing between Washington and Colorado. That was Dr. Lindsay DeMarchi, an astronomer and a space environmentalist, telling us why we have to keep our phones on airplane mode when we're on the aeroplane.